I am really happy to introduce Al Vernacchio, a colleague and a friend. Now, Al teaches at the Friends Central School in Wynwood, Pennsylvania. He is the Enter 12 Sexuality Education Coordinator. He teaches classes, organizes sexuality-themed programs and student assemblies, and provides parent education on human sexuality topics. And he's one of the faculty advisors for the Gender and Sexual Orientation Alliance. He's a human sexuality educator and has been a consultant for over 25 years. His work has been featured in publications throughout the US and abroad, and he's given 4 TED Talks, and that's impressive, 4 TED Talks, and has appeared on national programs such as NPR's Morning Edition and The Pulse. Al is the author of For Goodness Sake, Changing the Way We Talk to Young People About Sexuality, Values and Health. So I'd like to say I first met Al when we were both doing a podcast for the Katie Couric Show. And I remember listening to him and thinking just how incredibly impressive his work was. And as soon as I got home, I bought his book and listened to his TED Talks. So I'm so grateful to you, Al, for coming on, being willing to share your enormous expertise with this. And I welcome you to Culture Reframed.
Thank you so much, Gail. It's so good to be here. And thank you all for joining us. I'm happy today to talk to you about pornography from an educator perspective. And I'm going to share some slides with you. And I want to say up front that I will provide these slides for all the participants so that you don't have to worry about trying to quickly scribe and get information down. You'll have all this available to you in a PDF form. So as Gail said, I'm a comprehensive sexuality educator, and I really do believe that comprehensive sexuality education is a tool we can use to address many of the ills that pornography is bringing to young people today. The image that you see there on my first slide is actually a cartoon that one of my students drew of me. And Sex is Like Pizza refers to the first TED Talk that I gave, and I'll talk more about that in just a second. So I'm actually going to show you slides that I use with my own classes. And I'm going to go through 3 or 4 different kinds of activities that I do with classes to teach about pornography. And this is material that can be used. I teach this to a 9th grade class. So in the US, 9th grade students are about 14 years old, maybe 15 years old. A very small number are 13, a very small number are 16. But 9th grade is the first year of high school for kids in the US. And at my school, every 9th grader takes a required Intro to Human Sexuality course with me. So these are slides that I actually use in my classroom. I wanted to start just by showing you some of the actual ground rules that I use for my students so that we set the stage for talking about not just pornography, but all of the various topics we're going to talk about. So I invite students to speak for themselves and to use I statements. I tell them that I will never ask them questions about their own personal behavior. That's not my business. And that they may not ask questions of each other about that or of me, but that people are free to share information if they choose. But importantly, they're in charge of the information they share about themselves. I'm not in charge of that. Thirdly, I really encourage them to ask lots of questions about anything they're curious about, because I want to be able to be a resource for them to give them good information. We laugh a lot in our classes, and I think laughter is an acceptable and necessary and wonderful tool in education, as long as we're not laughing at someone. The idea of lessons leave and stories stay is not my invention. It's a phrase lots of us use. And what it means is when you leave the class, you can take all the information that you learned and share it widely with your friends, with folks at home, with people in your community, but anything personal that a student shares will stay in the classroom. I remind kids that it's okay to be embarrassed, that it is never the goal for me. I will never try to embarrass any student, but sometimes we're embarrassed when we're talking about human sexuality topics, and that's okay. And we can work through that, and embarrassment won't kill us. And learning how to work through that is a really important skill. Of course, we use language that's appropriate for school. And because I teach comprehensive sexuality education, it's also important that I use a social justice framework in my class. So one of our ground rules is we seek to interrupt any form of oppression that we find in the classroom, whether it comes from me or from another student. So anytime we might be veering into racism, classism, sexism, homophobia, heterosexism, ableism, etc., we want to interrupt it, call it out, and correct it. And then lastly, I really invite students to try to be brave and to make our classroom a brave space. This is a slide that I will show students on the first day of class. Usually pornography is not the first lesson that I teach, so this slide would not be there on the day we do pornography. But I want students to know that my primary work is as an educator. And that means that I'm not a doctor and I'm not a therapist. So I don't have medical training and I don't go into that area. And I'm also not trained to be a therapist. So although I'm happy to chat with students about their lives and their situations, I know my lane and I stay in my lane. And my lane is conveying information and practicing skills. That photo is one that a student took when we were doing faculty portraits, and that's my sex ed portrait. I also teach English in my high school, and I have another portrait where I'm leaning on the other elbow with English books piled up on the other side of me. I am an advocate for healthy sexuality. And when I say that, I want kids to know what I mean by that. And when I say healthy sexuality, I mean sexuality that is consent-based, pleasurable, fun, equitable, and amazing. Yes, I do hope that when my students come to the time when they are ready to move into a sexual relationship with someone else, that it will be amazing. There is far too much bad sex in our world. I am not interested in furthering people having awful, shame-filled, nervous sexual lives. So healthy sexuality for me is all of those positive qualities. And lastly, I always tell kids, I'm just here to give you some ideas. I'm not here to tell you what to do. As Gail said, I have given 4 TED Talks and they're all readily available. And I have written this book, For Goodness Sex. I wrote this book for adults because I realized that there are many adults who want to talk to young people about sexuality, but don't know how. And this book uses my years of experience at talking to young people about sexuality and giving some pointers on how to do it. And it talks a lot about my classroom and a lot about the way I do class and the stories that I tell in the classroom. And I'm very happy that this book has found its way to be translated into both Hebrew and Romanian. Okay, a quick word about comprehensive sexuality education. You may not have heard that term before, and it is a specific kind of sexuality education that I do. If you're interested in it, I would really encourage you to go to one article that just came out in 2020 called 3 Decades of Research, The Case for Comprehensive Sexuality Education by Eva Goldfarb and Lisa Lieberman. They did a meta-analysis of 30 years of literature about comprehensive sexuality education and found all of these wonderful positive benefits that in addition to preventing teen pregnancy and STIs, which is where a lot of sex education programs stop, comprehensive sex ed also goes on and has the benefits of helping to prevent child sex abuse, creating safer school spaces for diverse youth, specifically LGBTQ+ youth, increasing healthy relationships, reducing relationships violence. There's a myriad of wonderful things it does. When I talk about comprehensive sexuality education, these are the qualities that I want to promote in my classroom. You will also notice, by the way, that any slide that I created with my own information does carry my copyright, and I would ask you to please respect intellectual property. You are free to use this information, but please do give me credit when you use it. Thank you. So the qualities that I like to focus on comprehensive sexuality education is that first, that it is sexuality and sex positive. So it is not shameful. Sexuality is not a danger. It is not a wild force that needs to be controlled. It is a fundamental facet of human life. It is what allows us to figure out who we are most authentically and create authentic relationships that make the world better. It is medically accurate. and factually accurate. It promotes justice and equity. It is intersectional in that it looks at the multi-dimensions of people and answers questions of how do things like race and ability and class and gender intersect with sexuality. It promotes healthy sexuality across the lifespan. So we talk about the fact that we are sexual beings from the moment we are born until the moment we die. And at every age and stage, we can look at what healthy sexuality looks like. And in my job, I do teach a wide range of students. My school starts with nursery school with 3-year-olds and ends at the end of high school in the US, which is 18 years old. And I am responsible for creating programming for that entire age range, from 3 years old to 18 years old, helping kids to understand what healthy sexuality looks like. We promote media literacy, and we are expansive in our understandings of sexual identities, which means we are always open to hearing new ideas that students bring to us about how they identify their gender, their orientation, things like that. So that's really, those two last slides are not slides in my classroom. Those are for you in case you're interested in comprehensive sexuality education. So let's go to today's lesson, which is on pornography. I choose this image deliberately. This is just a Google image that I found online. But I like it for a couple of reasons. So one, it right away challenges one of the tropes of pornography, which is that it is a completely solitary, hidden experience. I don't know if the people in this picture are watching pornography on that computer, but I want to begin to question some of the assumptions about pornography right off the bat. I also love that this is a diverse couple or a diverse pair of individuals. I also love that the darker skinned person can be read as either a boy or a girl. And so there are many ways we can look at this image, and students might be able to see themselves there and know that this lesson is for them. The first thing I want to do in any, the first thing I want to do in any lesson is make an important distinction between material that is pornographic and sexually explicit material. I think this is a crucial distinction to make in a sexuality education classroom. So pornographic material is material that is created to sexually stimulate, to excite, and then I teach my kids this word, prurient, and that is made for prurient interest, which is interest in sort of the sexy part of sexuality, if you will. That's a poor definition. But sexually explicit material is material that might be designed for educational purposes or informational purposes. That's not about exciting or sexually stimulating or titillating anyone. And it's important for students to know this distinction, and we'll talk about more as we go through. So kids often say, well, who gets to decide what's pornographic and what's sexually explicit? Well, according to the laws of the US, where I am, intent does matter, but the intent is actually determined by a vague phrase called community standards. And so one of the things I want students to know is that actually you may decide something is in one of these categories or another, but your own personal opinion is not necessarily the one that matters in a legal sense. So just so they know that. And then I want to give students some examples. So this diagram of the human reproductive system may be sexually explicit. It's not pornographic. It's not designed to turn people on. It's designed to show the reproductive anatomy in males and females. Here's an image that actually shows sexual intercourse. There's a penis inside a vagina in this image. This image is clearly designed as anatomical and as informational. It's not really designed to turn people on. So it's sexually explicit. It's not pornographic. Here's an image of how to use a condom, and it does show a cartoon penis. But again, I would contend that this is not a pornographic image. This is a sexually explicit image, which can be used for educational purposes. Of course, we know that quote unquote adult magazines or pornographic magazines, here's an example of something that is both pornographic and sexually explicit. And we know that kids, rarely use magazines today. They're getting their porn online. So here I talk about how there are many websites that contain both pornographic and sexually explicit material, some that contain some pornography and other content as well. And then my little joke to them is in that box, because for high school students, I'm not really going to put the logos of Pornhub and Xtube and YouPorn up there. Because my assumption is many of them may already know that if the data that we have is accurate. And also B, if they don't know it, I don't really want to promote that. So there's a little joke there about, you don't really think I'm going to put porn logos up there, do you? Moving on from that point, I want to move to an activity called What Pornography Can Do. This is an activity that I've adapted from a really terrific manual called Streetwise to Sexwise by Steve Brown, who's a doctor of psychiatry. I use an add-on to these slides that's called a Pear Deck, P-E-A-R-D-E-C-K. And Pear Deck allows slides to become interactive. So when we go to each of these slides, the students are able, they have a little icon that's a little circle or a little triangle, and they can literally drag it to the answer that they think is the best response to the prompt. And then what I can do is, once they've all moved their dots, I can show the collected data to the class. It doesn't say whose dot is whose, but it does show the class's aggregate, how many people were in the yes box, how many people in the no, how many people in the maybe. And this is an activity, again, for ninth graders. It's designed to begin to get them to think about what actually is pornography for, and what actually can, if you're using it for sex education, what actually are you getting? So, can pornography explore possible ways of achieving pleasure? Lots of kids say yes for this. And my question back to them is, how do you know that? How do you know that the people that you're watching in pornography are actually feeling as good as they appear, right? Because we know pornography is a scripted, constructed fantasy. And these people are actors. And so are they really achieving pleasure, or are they acting? Because certainly there's a big incentive to look like it's pleasurable. So just that very beginning to say, well, how would you know that? Begins the process of helping kids think more critically about pornography. Does it show how to talk in advance about sex with a partner? No, it doesn't. Does it show various types of sexual behavior? Again, here a lot of kids will gravitate towards yes. And my question is, or my comment back is, I would say pornography shows a limited amount of sexual behavior. Mainstream porn is pretty formulaic. It shows the same kind of activity happening over and over again, and it does not show the full range of sexual activity that is open to people who are interested in being sexual. And so making sure they understand that what they see in porn is not the full spectrum of how humans relate to each other in sexual ways is important. Do they show what to do when you're starting a sexual relationship? Well, no, porn doesn't do that. Does it show us how to say no to unwanted sexual behavior? Here's a moment where we can talk about how porn often uses no's to mean yes, or often teaches that a no is something to be overcome rather than respected. And that is certainly not the kind of things we want to teach in a comprehensive sexuality education classroom. Is porn intersectional? Does it enhance diversity? Does it show the complex relationships of people's identities? Well, no. As a matter of fact, often porn fetishizes identities. So when it is showing people of different ethnicities or different abilities or even different orientations, it is doing so in a fetishized way, which again is not really respectful of those individuals and their differences. Does it show what the average people's bodies and sex organs look like? Well, again, a lot of kids will say yes, but again, porn shows a very limited view of bodies. And it doesn't really show bodies of what an average person looks like when they're in a sexual situation. And this leads us to talk about body image and lots of other issues that are really important. Does porn show safer sex practices for preventing pregnancy and STIs? Again, sometimes you'll see kids say yes to this or maybe. There are times where a condom magically appears in a porn scene. Rarely is the process of putting on a condom completely shown. And when it is shown, it's often shown with problems. For example, folks are trying to rip open the condom with their teeth. Does it show emotional connection? Not really. And if it does, how do you know? Does it show how long sexual activity takes? No, porn makes it seem like sex is endless and the average sex act takes about 10 minutes. So here's our summary chart of what we can learn from, what does pornography show us? And this activity leads to rich conversations with my students about porn, what it does show, what it doesn't show, because I want them to have an accurate picture of what they're actually looking at and what they possibly quote unquote gain from this. Moving on, I actually do show a couple of videos in my classes. Now, whenever I show a video, I always give students a preview of the video. And I give them the title of the video and where I find it. And if there's anything, so this first video has a cartoon, it shows cartoon female breasts and a cartoon male penis that looks like a lasso. I want them to know that up front. The second video is using food to talk about some of the differences between porn sex and real sex. I'm not going to show you these videos. Each of them are less than 2 minutes long. I've given you the videos and their internet links. So when you get these, you can look at them. Those videos are useful. And I also tell my students, you don't have to watch the videos if you don't want to, because I want to give students the choice. Maybe they don't want to, watch a cartoon video about that. And that's okay. This is an activity that can be part of the same lesson or that can be a separate lesson. And this is really looking not just at what happens when we're looking at porn, but the larger porn industry. So let's think about some larger questions here about not only what's happening in porn, but about the people in the industry who are making porn and the actors who are involved in the porn industry. So for example, I ask these questions to my students about the industry. Why does somebody decide to go into the porn business? What do you think? What's their primary goal? Well, then we talk about how, like any, porn is a business. And the main goal in most businesses is to make money. And that's what people are interested in. And oftentimes making money takes precedence over other priorities. And what rules do the business people in porn have to follow? Who regulates them? How do we know these businesses are businesses we would want to actually support with our time or our money? This slide just gives an explanation. One of the things I do when I talk about the industry is I relate it to things like sneakers and clothes. Kids often are aware that maybe their sneakers might be made in sweatshops in countries where workers are not given good working conditions or fair wages. And they have to really critically think about, is that something I want to support with my money and put on my body or not? I want the same kind of question to go with pornography. When it comes to the actors in porn, questions I ask my students are, do you think they entered the porn industry willingly and eagerly? Do you know how much they're paid? Do they get benefits? Do they get screened and treated for STIs? If porn's a job, does it have a retirement plan? How do we know, or what do we know actually about the industry and about how it treats the people who are involved in it? And do the actors have good working conditions? Again, a slide for you to look at later with explanation. And then for the viewers, I talk about what are some of the main reasons people your age look at pornography? How do you know if porn's having a damaging effect on you? And what's the relationship between you and those actors and the industry that you're involving with? For older kids, these might be questions they can research. For younger kids, we might just have conversations about them. When we're talking about, and then the very last thing I want to do quickly is just, these are some major points I like to make. And you can go and read these slides later. I'm going to go through them quickly for the interest of time. I want to leave some time for questions. But I want kids to always know that porn is a movie and not a documentary. I always say that thinking you can learn how to have sex from porn is like thinking you can learn how to drive by watching the Fast and the Furious movies. Kids often know that Hollywood movies are fantasies. They don't always understand that porn is just as fake and just as constructed and just as scripted as that. That the people in porn are real people, real human beings. And if we are not thinking about them as full human beings and respecting their full humanity, that's a problem. And that porn suggests that our sexual lives are very separate from the rest of our lives. And one of the things I want to teach young people is that healthy sexuality integrates our sexual selves and the rest of our lives. I want kids to know that just because you watch people have sex on a screen does not mean you're actually ready to have sex with a person in real life, because our sexual interactions, for the most part, will happen in real time with real people. And porn does not set us up for that. I want kids to know that porn is not intersectional, again, that it fetishizes many differences in people, and that in every other part of our life, we're trying to respect and celebrate difference and not fetishize it. And then lastly, I don't talk about porn as an addiction with my high school kids for two reasons. One is I am not, the data that I have seen, I've not seen data that shows me that porn actually works on the brain exactly the same way as alcohol and narcotics do. And I know we can debate that point. But secondly, addiction is a very scary word for kids. And I want to talk about a porn habit, because a habit is something we can work with and deal with. So I say things about porn habits, like some people masturbate a lot with porn and they can't masturbate any other time or any other way. Or if you want to stay home and watch porn rather than go out with your friends, that's a problem. And of course, heterosexual porn is very degrading to women and often shows violence against women. And that sometimes watching porn gets boring. And because of that, people seek out more extreme forms of porn to get re-stimulated, and that can really have an effect on people's real life sexual behavior. The very last thing I want to say to kids is that it's okay to be natural, it's okay to be curious, it's developmentally appropriate, and I want to show them different websites that I think they should go to if they want information about human bodies, human sexual activity, human relationships. So I want to give them places where I think they should go rather than porn to get those answers. I also tell them if they want to learn more about the porn industry to go to Culture Reframed. And lastly, this slide is for you later on. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm happy to talk with you and continue these conversations.